All right, welcome back to part 2 of the series on MultiGP, LiveTime, and the immersion LapRF. We've, in the first video, basically set up MultiGP to get everything ready to import into LiveTime. One last thing you might want to do is copy the ID up at the top, which will let you find the race quicker on LiveTime. So now we're going to go over to LiveTime, and real quick, when you first set up LiveTime, you need to create one track and at least one class. It doesn't matter what the names are. It needs them in order to actually have events and work properly. So once you do that, we're going to go to the events page, and you can either create an event manually or you can import from MultiGP. If you click here, it will bring you to the search page and show you basically all of the events, upcoming events that are happening in MultiGP. If you don't see yours, real quick by just glancing, you can paste that ID that you copied, and it'll automatically bring that up here. You can also search by name, but sometimes that's slow and you don't want to pick the right or the wrong one. So if you click on that, it'll show you kind of a preview on the right side. So it's going to import all of those pilots into the open class that I have. I only have one class, so it's the only option it's giving me. If you had like a rookie and pro class, you could pick, I want to pick or import these pilots into the rookie class, and etc. But most people are using just open class. And down here, it'll show you an overview of all the pilots. I've already imported them, so that's why it has a refresh icon. It's just updating everybody. If they were new, it would automatically add them to my local LiveTime database, which is cool. On the frequencies page, you'll see it has raceband 1, 2, Fat Shark 2, 4, raceband 7, and 8. Now, I actually had raceband 7 unchecked on the MultiGP website, and that will cause an issue in a minute, and I'll show you how to fix that. If you go to the Races tab, it's basically showing you what it's going to import. So you can choose to import the rounds or not from MultiGP. Default is checked, and then you can see here the different heats that it's going to import. And this is kind of just a spot check everything. You can't really change anything right now. So once you look over everything and you're happy with that, click Import Event. And I've actually deleted and re-imported this event several times. So say you screw something up and it's still before the race, you just want to start over, you can always delete it and redo that step. So real quick, we'll go into this edit screen. This is what it would look like if you were to create a race manually, but since it's importing it, you skip this screen. But what you do want to do is go back in here to edit, and over here for the main seating, you want to pick, I typically do like combined results, which will do like your best 3 out of 5 rounds, and then combine the time for those. So you don't have a bunch of tie people with, like 6 people with 6 laps at the end. It would actually rank them by the time that they completed those 6 laps in. So you don't have a bunch of tiebreakers to do at the end, which is nice. You can also do like fastest single round, which you did at our last race. You could do fastest top 3 consecutive, which is your fastest 3 laps. But we're going to go back here to fastest single round, and you can hover over each of these check marks to read more about it. We're not going to do a double main and triple main, but if you are, you can hover over and read more about the different tie-breaking techniques that you can use. For the main seeding tiebreaker, we just do next best result, which essentially looks at who consistently did the fastest. And then registration numbers, we don't really use that with MultiGP. Permanent drone numbers we don't have. Require active membership to register. That's another feature if you're managing like a large race outside of MultiGP, but don't really need that here. I like to check this box for keep the same drone numbers by default. This helps when you're creating races on the fly, but not really when you're importing from LiveTime, but doesn't hurt to have it checked. I'm going to click Save, which will bring us back to the event page. And we'll quickly go through here. There's a few important settings that you need to have. The default up here is ignore invalid laps, which you can hover over and read more about. But basically, laps under the minimum lap time are ignored, and the lap time continues to climb. So that way, if a pilot goes by the start gate accidentally before the minimum lap time is reached, it's just going to ignore that, lap time and keep counting, which is what we want. If you did breakout invalid, it would start over the lap time, and that would cause some timing issues. So for the most part, ignore invalid is what you want. If you had a special circumstance, you could change it to breakout invalid. Minimum lap time is important. I usually do 15, something low to start until I start seeing what the times are going to be for the day. 15 is usually a good number. Maximum lap time, you can leave at 0, doesn't matter. Heads up lap count after delay, or count delay after start. This, you have to read it somewhat carefully. So it's the lap count delay after you start. So essentially, if I were to put a number here, it would wait that long before it starts to count pilots. Um, you can use that. However, if you have somebody that maybe flipped over on the start mat and they're going to take longer than say I put in 15 seconds here. So they take 15 seconds to cross the start line. It's going to count that first pass as a lap. So what I usually do is leave this at 0 and then check this box underneath that says do not count first lap after delay. So now I'm going to have a delay of 0, so it's immediately not going to count their first pass through the start gate. And then it's going to be the whole shot. It's going to count that as a whole shot, their first pass through. And then the heads up allow first lap as fastest. That is important if you are doing like best 3 consecutive laps and a pilot only gets 3 laps. I learned that this past weekend. It actually won't count it if you have that unchecked. If a pilot only does 3 laps, it won't count that as an actual qualifying entry. So make sure you have that checked if you're doing best 3 consecutive. Otherwise, if you're doing like fastest round, it doesn't matter. Down here, there is this limit to 5 laps box. I never use that. Just don't worry about it. It kind of may fool you into doing like best of 3 laps. It's not how you do that. So just ignore that. So down here, you can have practice round sorting, and that's really just showing you who, when you start the race, like who you can have it sort by, these different results. It's really personal preference. Down here, we have practice qualifying and ready round shared settings. Qualifying is what we're going to be running for the main heats, and we want that to be a time. And we want it to be heads up. So make sure you do heads up, otherwise stagger will start everybody at a different time, which you do not want. Do heads up, and we're going to do 4 pilots, or actually 5 pilots per heat, and the heat time is going to be 2 minutes. Now, main settings, if you're going to do double elimination or single elimination, what you're going to want to do is change this to laps. So it's going to do first to 3 laps, for example, and then we're going to do bracket. And then down here you can do single elimination or double elimination. And you have to do a little math here and multiply these 2 numbers. So if you wanted to take top 16, you would do 4 initial races, 4 pilots per race. If you wanted to do top 8, you would just do 4 pilots per race, 2 initial races. So that would take the top 8. And the main length is going to be 3 laps. And I usually ask pilots what they want to do at the end and let them decide. And then once you do that, this page is pretty much good to go, and it'll automatically carry over when we get into the race. On the frequencies tab, you'll see that it imported raceband 1, 2, Fat Shark 2, 4, raceband 7, and 8. I don't want to use raceband 7. I'm actually going to remove that. And now we're left with the 5 channels that we're going to use for the day. Now this is important to set this up right because I'll show you now up here in the decoder section, which is this green icon. When it's green, it means it's connected. I'm going to do another video on how to connect the LapRF because that can be a headache in itself. But once it's green, go in here to the settings, and then you'll see under the setup tab the different channels that it has. So the 8-way has 8 receivers, and by default, they're all going to be on. And when you first connect and you set this up, you want to click the sync event video frequencies, and you see that it changed over here to the first 5 channels that I'm using. But then after that, though, it's going to leave these the same. So, for example, like raceband 8 here, if a pilot on raceband 8 were to go through and I left this on, it would double count their lap time. So make sure that you come in here and you turn off the channels that you're not using. And then under the decoder setup, power level, most people run 25 milliwatts. Sensitivity, I'm going to put it 0. 95% of the time, that's worked out fine for me. If you do have a course that, maybe a huge start gate, or you have a flag that's closer to the start gate, or a gate that's closer to the start gate, and pilots are double triggering, you might want to set the sensitivity to negative. Make sure that you save it after each time you make a change. Don't change stuff during a race, usually, because it'll turn the decoder red for a minute, or a couple seconds, and it'll miss their lap time if a pilot's like in the middle of a race. And then just to double check everything, I like to come to the diagnostic screen, and you can see here that the numbers are moving, which is good. I check this periodically to make sure that things are still working right. If this ever freezes, you might need to restart LiveTime or restart the LapRF. Haven't had that happen in a while, but it's a good thing to check. Over here, the gain and threshold is directly tied to the sensitivity option that you selected. So we had 0, and so this is kind of the default sensitivity. If you wanted to make it more sensitive manually, say, you needed to make it more sensitive for a certain channel, which I've had to do before, I could bump this up to 60, and now it's going to be more sensitive on raceband 1. Generally, though, I leave them all the same. Threshold is kind of the value that it wants to see when a pilot crosses for it to trigger. You can increase or decrease that depending, again, on sensitivity. It's kind of a combo. They work together. You can read more about exactly how that works in the LapRF manual. But these are the default settings. They usually work pretty good. Another thing to check is on the communication tab here. You can see that it's getting it's talking to it several times a second, which is great. That means that we're going to get lap times, no problem. If you ever see this and it's like, every other second, or you're not getting anything here, that means that there's, maybe some packet loss going on. You might need to restart LiveTime, restart LapRF, or check your Ethernet connection. So I've had this before too, like save and it go back to the old settings. So just double check if something weird's happening and it's like not counting pilots or double counting others. Always come back here first and just double check that you have the right frequency set up, and then make sure that you've clicked save. And next thing we want to do is go to the heat main, and a lot of buttons on this page, but basically I've imported everything already, at least for Q1. So the run round I created a MultiGP is already here, and you can see over here raceband 1, 2, Fat Shark 2, 4, and raceband 8. It did not, I don't have anybody on raceband 7 here, which is what we want. And yeah, that's basically that. So the reason I said to only create one round first is, let's say that we needed to go back and change something on, pushing all the buttons, change something on MultiGP. If you wanted to move a pilot, let's say like we wanted to move Nate over here, and I had already created 5 rounds, it would I would basically have to go into each of those 5 rounds and manually move him over. And this only matters if you want LiveTime to sync up perfectly with MultiGP. And a lot of times I've stopped basically getting it to sync properly. And I'll just usually come back in here and put, number of points for the winners and leave it at that. If you want everything to sync perfectly though, you got to make sure that all of these match up correctly. Because if something's different here than on LiveTime, then it just gets out of whack and it won't sync up properly. So once you're happy with this first round, you can go ahead and create more rounds. And then, let's see. So let's say, click the add a round button. And now we have round 2. And oh, look, it's empty. Great. So we're going to have to generate race schedule. This is actually going to mess up our original. So you can see here that I'd moved Nate over here, but now it moved him back. And this is just one pain of trying to get everything to work properly. Um, it's a real pain to come back here and move everybody individually over. Um, Another reason to only add one to start is because let's say I did mess that up and I did want to go back and change everything. Um, so like I went through here and moved Nate over 5 times. I would have to come back to LiveTime. It would have imported all 5 of those rounds, and then I would have had to refresh each of those 5 rounds, which is a huge pain in the butt. So I've only got one in there now. On MultiGP, it's got 2. So what you can do, let's click this Add Missing Rounds button. It'll say 1 round has been imported, which is the missing round that I just created, and you can see now that it matches up. If you do want to change something, so I'll go here and say Nate needs to be here for round 2, and then I'll go up here and say Nate needs to be here for round 3 or round 1. If you save that, it's not going to automatically update LiveTime. So what you're going to have to do is go back to LiveTime. You'll see that it's the original way currently. If you click this refresh from MultiGP button up here, it will go ahead and move him out of that. And then I got to go over here and refresh the second race, and it will add him there. So then you have to go to each race and do that. That's why it's important to do kind of the initial race when you're first importing, and then I'll show you how to duplicate around in LiveTime after that. So once you have your race and you're good with the heats, you can say create new round. It's going to be a qualifying round, and want to duplicate last round, start in the same order. Make sure you do that, otherwise it'll shuffle people around. Keep the same FPV frequency. It's going to because it's going to duplicate it. And click generate. So now we have 3 rounds in LiveTime, 2 rounds on MultiGP. And you can see though that it copied exactly the same as Q2. So now if I were to go to MultiGP and add another round, generate another race schedule, it would sync back up to here as long as this match MultiGP. So again, either way you slice it, there's not a great way to make sure that it's perfectly synced up, which is unfortunate, but that's just how it is. If you need to change somebody's frequency, you can right click and say change frequency to something else. Now I have 2 people on Fast Shark 4, which obviously isn't good. But that's how you change frequency on the fly. Let's say that a pilot showed up and they couldn't register on MultiGP and you're just wanting to add them to the heat. You can see over here, these are all the pilots that have not been added to a heat yet. And even though they didn't check in on MultiGP, they're showing up here, which is kind of nice. So if you didn't want to worry about going back to MultiGP and fixing that right now, you can just drag them over and it'll automatically assign them a channel, which is next in line, which is great. So that's another reason to get your event channel or frequencies worked out correctly, because if you're dragging people over here, it's going to not do what I just said. Huh, that's weird. I deleted that earlier, but now it's back. So if I remove Fat Shark 7, or sorry, Raceman 7, and let's say you can right click to remove people from race. So now if I add somebody, it should give them Raceman 8. Yeah. So that's a good way to do it if you're kind of manually creating heats on the fly. You want to make sure that your frequencies are set right in events. I'm assuming that since I refreshed from MultiGP that it also refreshed the frequencies, which is kind of annoying, but I can understand why you do that. And then, yeah, so it automatically assigns them a frequency. So then on race day, if you don't want to mess with MultiGP anymore, you can just drag people over and create your own heats, which is usually what I end up doing. Once you have that set up, go to the race screen, make sure you selected Q1, and you're basically ready to start. The settings flyout tab is copied the settings that we put on the events page. If you wanted to change stuff on the fly, you could. Um, this will always override the events screen settings. And for practice, what you'll want to do is you see this change to practice round button. If I click that, it'll change this Q1 to a P1, and then now only have 2 qualifying heats. And it basically converts it. So now if I go here, you'll see P1. So this is practice. So this is not going to count toward qualifying. It's going to be what I would call like a structured practice heat. So if you're going to do heats like in practice, like you're going to have in qualifying, this is the way that you would do that. So again, you just go here, click change to practice round, and you can do this as many times as you need to for practice. And you can keep creating rounds like I showed you earlier to basically, if you wanted to have 5 practice rounds or whatever, you can just keep creating and duplicating. And on the right side here, you can see who should be spotting. So it'll automatically come up as the next heat. So this is kind of handy. You can click announce as spotters. And that's kind of handy if you want to announce, who the spotter should be. You could also say coming up. That's who that's going to be. Let's see. Race laps, you can see here. I've never actually used this. It's kind of cool. You can see the lap breakdown for each pilot. It shows it as a small number over here once you start the race, but I suppose this is like a bigger view. It'll also show you if it's forced or not. Estimated position is cool to have up during a race because you can see, during qualifying, like where people are going to be at if they've broken the bubble live or not. It's kind of neat. And since we're in practice, though, it wouldn't matter. And let's go ahead and start the race. And now you can see it started to count down. You can use your keyboard to trigger laps, since I'm not actually flying right now. One handy thing is if you right click on this lap time, so it's going to have all the individual lap times right here. If you right click, you can do delete selected lap or add a forced lap here. So if it misses somebody, you always want to be checking, like going through the start gate, just double checking that it's calling out lap times when somebody goes through the start gate. If not, I usually keep a pen and paper close by so I can keep notes to either go back in DVR or add a lap for somebody. If you add a forced lap, it's going to restart their lap time. So I'm always cautious to do that when a pilot's already on their next lap, because then it may not trigger it if it's below the minimum the next time that they come around. So I usually wait to do that. However, I always delete laps if it's double triggering or something. I always do that during the race because that won't affect it. So yeah, now if I go here, I can say delete lap, and now it'll count and move him down here in last place. And then again, if I wanted to add a lap, I can add a forced lap there. That's pretty much it. Here, another thing to note is if a pilot's getting really close to like 5 and 2, 2 minutes, a lot of times spotters are going to be looking to see if they go through the gate on time or not. And I always fall back to the timer. I think it's the most correct out of, pilot spotting. And the reason being is, it takes a second for the timer to actually tell live time, or actually the live time to, actually give the buzzing sound, the pilots to hear that are spotting, and then actually making that call. So once you'll know that if a pilot made it or not, whether their box turns gray. So if their box is gray and it's still like negative, that means that they didn't make it. And if they're still trying to do their last lap, you can tell them to land. Once this turns gray, it means they're done. So if they get done and it's like 2 minutes, 2/100ths of a second, and then that's just the way it is. It sucks, but um, if you don't follow any sort of kind of rule like that, then it becomes up to the pilot's discretion, and then the results aren't as fair, in my opinion. But you can do whatever rule that you think is best for your club, and always do finish as soon as you can. Let's say like this guy crashed out, he went to pick up his quad, and then he walks past the start gate. It's going to trigger that as another lap and give that to him. So you want to make sure that you click finish as soon as you can after everybody lands. That way it'll kind of freeze all the results and make sure that they're correct. Now clicking finish here seems kind of scary because it means like, wait, what if the lap count's wrong? You can always go back in after you finish to this race editor, and this is where you can kind of adjust the different laps and times that they had. If you're doing top 3 consecutive, this is where it becomes a huge pain to go back in DVR and then enter the correct lap times here. If you're doing like best, 3 out of 5 rounds, really what matters is these first two. So the number of laps and the number of time. This is like 2 minutes and 19 seconds. And so let's say that it missed one of his laps. I'll still do 5 laps in the total amount of time, so that's going to be accurate. Once you're done with that, you click done and move on to the next heat by clicking this up arrow, and we do it all over again. Once you get into qualifying, I'll just start real quick here. You can see when it turned red, it's under the minimum lap time, so that's why it's not counting it. I'll just keep pushing it until it starts counting. Okay. Finish this race just so we have some times in there. So this is a qualifying round, heat 2. Should have been heat 1, but whatever. Here, to create the main round, what we're going to do is create next round, click yes. It's going to be a main, and then it'll show you here like how everybody ranks. And so since we did top 8, it's going to pick the top 8, but since only 3 or 4 people had qualifying times, that's why they're white and the others are red. You want to make sure to just keep the same FPV frequency as checked, so it tries to keep people on the same channels, which is nice. Once you do that, you click generate. It's probably not going to like this because, yeah, I guess it just took the top 8. So here, what you would do, I didn't like that we didn't have a full 8 in there because there should be more races than this, but unless we did single, yeah, I think we did single elimination. So since we did single elimination, there's going to be basically 3 races, and top 2 from each will move on to the final race. You can also view this as a bracket. Yeah, and then you just go back to the race screen, make sure you've got the main round selected, and you'll notice this changed to laps left instead of time left, and works the same way. You can do the races out of order too, like if you needed to do the second heat instead of the first heat. If somebody's fixing something, you can also do that. And that's pretty much it. Hope that was helpful. Planning on doing more kind of in-depth videos on each of the individual features or things that you can do, but that's an overview on kind of how to set up for race day.